Welcome to this WiseOwl report builder tutorial. In this video we'll explain how to create drill-through reports using a matrix. We'll start by creating the target report containing the table of results you'd like to see and show you how to add optional hidden parameters to that report. We'll then explain how to create the parent report using the matrix and how to assign drill-through actions to the value cell of that matrix. We'll also move on and explain how you can add drill-through actions to the row, column and grand totals of the matrix, and finally explain how to deploy the reports to a report server and hide the target report in the web portal. So let's get started. Here's the example we'll aim to create in this video. This matrix shows the average runtime in minutes for films divided into groups according to the genre they belong to and the certificate awarded to them. It's not very attractively formatted, I'll freely admit, but that's not really the point of this video. The point is that the data cells, the cells in the values area of the matrix, each have an action assigned to them. So that if, for instance, I wanted to drill through to see all of the films in the action genre with a PG certificate, which make up this data point, I can simply click on that cell to load a link or a drill through report, which shows me a list of all the films matching those two conditions. If I want to see a different category, I can go back to the parent report and then I can click on, let's say, the 12 certificate for the adventure genre, and that will load another table showing a list of all those films. And I can do a similar thing for the row and column totals. If I simply want to see a list of all the animation films, regardless of which certificate was assigned to them, I can click on the row total there to see all the animation films with different certificates. And in a similar fashion, as you might expect, if I scroll down to the bottom and see the total row for each column, I could pick on the 15 certificate and see all the films with a 15 certificate in any genre. And finally, I've got a grand total cell or a grand average cell in the bottom right-hand corner. And if I drill through using that cell, it shows all the films with any certificate and any genre. So that's what we'll aim to create in this video. The first thing we'll do is create the child report or the target report, the report you end up on to see the list of film details once you've clicked on a cell in the parent matrix. This report also requires a couple of parameters so that we can pass values into those to filter the results shown in the report. If you wanted to follow along, you'll need a copy of the WiseOwl Movies database, and this video explains how to get that set up if you haven't already done so. There's a link in that video's description that you can use to download the file you'll need. If you have done that already, I've got a blank report waiting for me in Report Builder, and I'm going to start by right-clicking on the Data Sources folder and choose to add a data source to connect to that Movies database. So I'll call the data source Movies. I'll use an embedded connection pointing to a Microsoft SQL server, and then click the Build button to help construct the connection string. I'll type in a shortcut to my local host, // and then the name of my SQL Server instance, which is SQL 2017. There shouldn't be a space there either. I can then select my database name from this drop-down list, and I can choose Movies, click OK a couple of times, and that's the data source created. Next, I'll right-click on the data source and choose to add a data set. And I will make sure that I change its name. I'll call this one Films, simply. And then I'll use the query designer to help me construct this. I'd like to be able to display the certificate and the genre for the film that I've selected. So as well as picking some film details from the film table, I'm also going to include columns from the certificate table, just the certificate, and the genre table. So I'll expand that and select the genre. Then from the film table, I can pick as many or as few details as I like. Let's go for the title, the release date, and the runtime minutes. Having done that, I can click OK again, and then I can build a simple table to display those results. I'll tidy up my report a little first. Let's get rid of the page footer and then get rid of this placeholder title text box. Then I can right-click into the report body, choose to insert a table, and then assign those 5 fields to the various columns of my table. So I'll go title, release date, runtime minutes, and then I can click and drag the 2 other columns, certificate and genre, and attach those to the right-hand side of the table. I'll just do a little bit of formatting. First of all, to make sure that I don't run into the font rendering bug, I'll highlight all the cells in the table and then switch from the default font to any other, and then back to the default font. That's just to make sure that I don't inadvertently hide a lot of the text in the table when I run the report. You may have encountered that bug yourself. Certainly if you've been following the rest of this series, you will have. I'll change some column widths as well to make things a little more readable. I'll format the release date cell as a date as well, and then change the column width of the genre column as well, because I know that's got some slightly longer text in it. And then I'll highlight the first row, the column headers, change the background colour and the font colour, make it bold to stand out a little bit. And that's the basics of that report created. Let's just give it a quick run to test that it looks sensible. And we should see a list of all the films with the relevant genre and certificate sitting next to them. Next, I'd like to add a couple of parameters so that I can filter this list based on the certificate ID and the genre ID. So I'll head back to the design view. Now you'll know if you've watched the previous videos in this series about working with parameters, we can do this either using a report parameter and a dataset filter, or we can add our parameters directly to the underlying SQL query to create query parameters. That's the technique I'm going to use in this video. I'm going to right-click on the films dataset and choose dataset properties. And then at the end of my select statement, right at the very end of the text after the from clause, I'll add a new line and write a where clause to see only those films where the film.certificate ID is equal to, and then I can make up the name of my parameter. I'm going to call this one @cert ID, just because I can't be bothered typing out the word certificate again. Then I need to add an AND operator because I want to check also that the film.genre ID is equal to the name of a new parameter that I'll make up. I'll call this one @genre ID. Having done that, I can click OK, and you'll see that as well as having created the query parameters in the query text, Report Builder automatically creates the corresponding report parameters required to have the user enter values. And to test that those work, I can run the report. If I were to type in a genre ID, the number 1, I know those are Western films, and in the certificate ID field I type in the number 5, I believe that corresponds to 15 certificates. If I view the report now, that should be what we'll see. And there we go, so that's working quite nicely. I'd also like to make these parameters optional, and I can do that by allowing a null value for each of the parameters. Let's head back to the design view, and I'm going to start by double-clicking my certificate ID report parameter, and I can choose to allow a null value by checking that box. While I'm here, I'm also going to update the data type of this parameter. It's not necessary, you've just seen that this works without modifying the data type. But in the underlying database, the certificate ID is an integer column. And I think it makes sense to match the data type of the report parameter to the data type of the database parameter, or sorry, the database field, even if it's not actually required. So I'm going to set that to an integer. I'm then also going to make sure that the default value of this parameter is null. So I'm going to head to the default values page and specify a value, click the add button, and that provides a null value or a null as the default value. So I'll click OK for the certificate ID. You'll see the null checkbox has appeared. I can then do the same thing for the genre ID. I'll change its data type to an integer, allow a null value, head to the default values page, specify values, and then click the add button and click OK. Now, although this allows me to run my report without passing a value to either parameter, it won't actually, of course, show any results yet, because there aren't any films whose certificate ID is equal to null and equal to null for the genre ID. So to make this work, I also need to modify my where clause in the underlying query. Let's head back to the design view, and I can right-click on the films dataset again and choose dataset properties. What I now need to do is, in the where clause, if I just zoom in a bit more so you can see it again, I need to add a second criterion to each parameter. So for the where clause, for the certificate ID, I'm going to ask where the film certificate ID is equal to the @certID parameter, or the @certID parameter is null. And I'm going to wrap that pair of conditions or criteria in a set of round brackets. I can then do the same thing on the next row. So on the next row, and open some round brackets, film.genreID equals @genreID, or @genreID is null, and then close the round brackets. While I'm here, I'm just going to take the opportunity to add an order by clause as well to sort my results. So I'm going to say order by and then say film.title so that my films appear in ascending order of film name. I can then click OK. And this time when I run the report, I'll see that the parameters have nulls as their default values, and this time it does indeed show me all the films, regardless of what certificate or genre they have. When the end user sees this report, I don't want them to be able to see these two parameters so that they can simply start typing values into these boxes. So we will eventually make these parameters hidden parameters, but just for the moment I'm going to leave them visible. There's a couple of things I'd like to demonstrate later on in the video. So at this point I think we're done with the design of this child report or target report, so I'm going to head back to the design view and then choose to save it to my report server. We need to save it to the report server because when you create an action you can't target a report that's saved just in your machine's file system, so it needs to be saved to the report server first. So I'm going to choose to save the report. I'll point to my report server and I've got a separate folder for drill through reports. I'll navigate into that. I will call this one genre certificate, if I can spell certificate properly, certificate target report. And then I can click save and that's that report done with for the time being. Now let's make a start on designing the parent report. To do that, I'll head up to the File menu in Report Builder and choose New, and then click the Blank Report button to create a brand new blank report. A little bit of repetitive tasks at this point. I need to create a data source, and I'll call this one Movies again. I suppose using a shared data source would be a sensible thing here, but I'll use an embedded one just because I don't have a convenient shared data source to work with at the moment. I'll choose Microsoft SQL Server and then click the Build button. I can then type in my server name /SQL 2017 and then select my Movies database from the drop-down list. I can then click OK a couple of times and there's the data source created. For the data set, I'll right click on Movies and choose Add Dataset. I'll call this one, I'll just call it Films again just for short, and then click the Query Designer to pick all the fields I'll need. From the Tables folder, I'm going to select everything from the certificate table first, so certificate ID and certificate. Then I'll do the same thing for the genre table as well, so I'll pick the genre ID and the genre. And then from the film table, I'm only going to select the single column that I'm going to aggregate, which is the runtime minutes. I'm going to create some average runtimes in the matrix itself. Having done that, I can click OK and then OK again. I'll tidy up my report a little again, so let's get rid of this page footer and get rid of this title text box. And I'll right click into the body of the report and this time insert a matrix. I'm going to begin by setting up my row groups by choosing the genre ID field. When I choose genre ID in the row groups area, that sets not just the display value, but also which field is used to perform the grouping. So choosing the ID field can give you better performance because it's just a simple number rather than a long string of text. But of course I don't want to display the genre ID to the end user. That would be a little bit meaningless. So I'm going to change the field in this box now to genre rather than genre ID. It doesn't alter the grouping, it just changes what's displayed in the cell. I'd also like to make sure that the group is sorted alphabetically by genre name, not ID. So another thing that happens when you select a field in a matrix initially is that it sets a default sort order for the group. I'm going to right click on the group in the Groups panel and choose Group Properties. And then on the sorting page, change the Sort By option to say Sort By Genre rather than Genre ID. A similar thing to do next for the columns grouping. I'm going to select the Certificate ID first, which creates the initial grouping on the ID field, and it also sorts by the certificate ID as well. I can then change what's displayed in that cell by changing that to certificate. And I don't want to change the sort order actually. The ID sort order of certificate is better than the alphanumeric sort order, so I'm not going to bother changing that. Finally, in terms of displaying something to the user, I want to add the runtime minutes to the data cell, and then I can change the sum of runtime minutes by clicking on that text, then right-clicking on it, choosing Summarize By, and then AVG. A bit of basic formatting required next, I think. Let's get rid of the text ID at the end there, first of all. Then I can select all the cells in the matrix, switch away from the default font and then back to it, and then a bit of changing of the column widths. I'm going to make sure that the average runtime is formatted with 2 decimal places, and I can do that by selecting the number format from the drop-down list. I could then just do some very basic formatting for the background colours of the cells. Let's just do something really quick and simple just to make them stand out enough to be readable. And we're nearly there, I promise. Let's just change the background colour of that and make the genre name bold as well. Okay, we're there. If I run the report, we should now be able to see our basic matrix showing those simple average runtimes for each combination of genre and certificate. Okay, now we're ready to set up the action on the value cell in the matrix so that when we click on it, it passes the ID number for the genre and the ID number for the certificate to the next report and shows the relevant films. Let's head back to the design view, and we can get to the action properties in a couple of different ways. I'm going to right click on the average runtime minutes cell and choose text box properties. From the dialog box then I can select the action tab on the left hand side, and the action I'm going to set up is to go to a report. I can then select the report by clicking the browse button, and this is where I need to select a report on my report server. I can't select from the my local drive. I can go to my drill through reports folder, find the one that I just saved, genre certificate target report, and then I need to add parameters. So I can click the add button twice to add 2 parameters. I can select the parameters of the report from these drop-down lists, so cert ID and then genre ID. And then I can choose the fields from this report whose values I want to pass into those parameters. So that's going to be certificate ID and then genre ID. Having done that, I can click OK. I can then run the report, and if I identify a cell to click on, let's go for PG action films. I'll click on that cell with the number 113.73, and we should see that it loads the report we saved to the report server. It's passed in some values to these 2 parameters and filtered the results accordingly. I can get back to the parent report by clicking this simulated back button here, so that's the same as the back button we saw in the web portal at the start of the video. And then I could pick a different cell. Let's go for 15 films in the crime genre, and that will show me a completely different list. So that's all working pretty nicely at this point. Let's head back to the design view. One thing you may have noticed from the sample report I showed at the start of the video was that when I move the mouse cursor over a cell which contains a number, the mouse cursor changes to the follow hyperlink cursor. But when I move the cursor over an empty cell, there's nothing to click on, so clicking in those empty cells does nothing at all. That's not quite the same at the moment for our matrix. If I run this report again, you'll see that no matter which cell in the matrix I hover the mouse over, it indicates that I can follow a hyperlink. So if I were to click on a blank cell there, it does load the next report, but it uses the default values of those parameters set to null and simply shows every single film from every genre and certificate. That might be a sensible thing, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure it is the sensible thing to do. I would prefer to only be allowed to click on the values that, the cells which do indeed have a value in them. So to make that work, I'm going to go back and select the cell in design view. An alternative way to get to the action settings is to use the properties window. You can see right at the very top there's an action property, and I can click on the little ... or ellipsis button that appears to get straight back to the action settings. What I'm then going to do is find the specify a report property and click the FX button just to the right of that to open up the expression builder. I'm going to wrap this up in an if statement that checks if the value of the cell or the value of the runtime minutes field is nothing. And if the value of the runtime minutes field is nothing, I'm going to set the action report name to nothing as well. So let's get started with that. First of all, I'm going to wrap a set of double quotes around this report path. So we're going to convert that into a string. Let me zoom in so you can see this a little more clearly as well. Then I'll hit enter at the start of that line to bring it down a couple of lines and type in a few spaces at the beginning to indent it a little bit. Because at the top of this, we're going to write an if function. So I'm going to start with equals IIF and then open some round brackets. On the next line, indented a few spaces again, I'm going to test a condition. I'd like to check if the value of the runtime minutes field for the cell we're hovering the mouse cursor over is nothing. So one way to do that is to refer to, from the fields list, the runtime minutes field. So I can double click on that, and then I can type in is nothing. This is the Visual Basic equivalent of saying is null, which is what we wrote in our where clause in the SQL query earlier on. At the end of that, I'm going to type in a comma, and if that condition is true, if there is no runtime minutes value in the cell, I'm going to say that the target for this action is also nothing. I can then type in a comma at the end of that, and then at the end of the very last line, beg your pardon, I've just hit the wrong keyboard shortcut there, do apologise. At the end of the last line, what I'm going to do is type in a closed round bracket just to complete the if function. Okay, so having done that, I'm going to click OK, and then OK again, and we should see that this time when I run the report, when I move the mouse cursor over a cell which does have a value in it, I can click on that to follow the link. And then I can click the back button to go back to the parent report. But if I hover the mouse over and indeed click on any of the empty cells, nothing at all happens because that's what my if statement has said. Next, I'd like to add a column which shows me the overall average runtime in minutes for films in the genre, regardless of which certificate has been assigned. I can do that fairly easily back in the design view by right-clicking on the value cell in the matrix and then choosing Add Total Column. Now, although it copies the formatting and the aggregate function across, if I select that cell, you'll see that it doesn't copy across the action. So what I'm going to do now is go to the action property and click the ... button, choose to go to a report, and then hit the Browse button to browse back to that Drill Through Reports folder and choose the same report, Genre Certificate Target Report. I can then add a parameter. I'm going to add the genre ID parameter so that I can pass in the genre ID for the row I've just clicked on. But I'm not going to bother passing in a value to the certificate ID parameter. And the reason for that is that earlier on, you may remember, we allowed a null value for that parameter, so it's optional. And we tested for that null value in the where clause of the SQL query, so that if we didn't pass a value to that parameter, it shows films for all certificates. So if I click OK and then run the report, we should see that if I click on the total cell or the overall average cell for action, I see a list of all the action films, regardless of which certificate has been assigned to them. I can go back to the parent report and just to reassure you that it does still filter for the certificate. If we click on a cell containing both a certificate and a genre, I get the 18 certificate action films. So yeah, at this point I could click on any row total or row overall average and get all of the films from that particular genre, regardless of what certificate was assigned to them. We can create a total row in very much the same way. Let's head back to the design view, and then I'm going to right click on my original value cell and this time choose Add Total Row. Again, I get the same aggregate function but without the same action, so I'll select the cell and then head to the action property, click the ... button and then choose to go to a report, pick the same report again, and then this time the parameter that I'm going to add is going to be the one just for the certificate. So I'll pick the cert ID parameter and pass the certificate ID value into it. I can then click OK. And when I run the report, you'll see that if I click on the overall average for the U certificate, it loads the target report, leaves the genre ID as null, so it returns all the genres, but the certificate has been filtered for the specific one that I've clicked on. Finally, we could do the same thing for the grand total or the grand average cell at the bottom right-hand corner of the matrix. To get that to work, let's head back to the design view And then I need to fill in the aggregate function myself here. Not too much hard work, I shouldn't complain too much. If I select the runtime minutes field from the field selector and then click on the sum, right click on that and choose summarize by AVG. I'll also want to make sure that I've formatted that as a number. It doesn't copy the formatting, unlike adding the row and column totals. So I'll format that as a number to get to 2 decimal places. And then I can select that cell, head up to the action property, click the ... button, and then choose go to a report. Once again, choose that exact same report from drill through reports, genre certificate, target report. And this time I'm not going to bother passing any parameters or values to any of the parameters. If I just click OK and then run the report, when we click on that grand total, or that grand average cell, it loads the target report, leaves both parameters as null, and therefore shows all the films in the list. Okay, at this point I think we have just a little bit of tidying up and formatting to perform. Of course, I'll want to get rid of the visible parameters from my target report, and I'll want to save my parent report to the report server as well. Just before I do that, I'm going to go back to the design view and just add a bit of basic formatting to some of these cells. So I'm going to highlight the row and the column totals by holding down the control key, and then I'm going to select the sort of middle blue background color and make the font white and make the font bold as well. And then for the bottom right hand corner cell, I'm going to make it a darker blue. Let's go for dark blue, and then make the font white there and the font bold as well. Okay, having done that, let's just run that report at that stage. And you can see that the font has been formatted in white here when I'm running the report in Report Builder. What I'm going to do now is head back to the design view, and then I'm going to save this report to my report server. So I'll save this, and I'll call this one, let's call it Parent Matrix, and then click Save. Now that I've done that, I'm going to navigate back to my Drill Through Reports folder. And you can see the 2 reports I had from the previous video. So let's just refresh this folder to bring in my 2 new reports. And it always takes a long time, or it seems to take longer when I'm waiting for it in a video than it does when I'm not. But there we go, eventually. Parent Matrix, let's have a quick look. If I open up the Parent Matrix, what has happened to our white font? Well, it isn't white at all, is it? It's stayed black. Apparently this is a bug involved in a combination of SQL Server 2017 and the Google Chrome or the new Microsoft Edge browser, that when you assign an action to a cell in a table or a matrix, the font color doesn't honor the property that you've set. The simple way around it is a bit annoying that you have to do it in the first place, but there is a fairly simple way around it. If I head back to the design view of my report and I just highlight those 3 cells, so that I can see the font color property in the properties window. Rather than referring to the color white as we've selected it from the drop-down list, I can change this into a basic expression by saying equals white in some double quotes. Simple solution, but annoying that we have to do it in the first place, I suppose. So having done that, I can now save my report again. And then if I go back to the matrix that's deployed to the report server and simply refresh that report, we should now see that the font color is honored, even running in the report web portal. Next, I'd like to make the parameters in the target report hidden. So to do that, I can head back to my Drill Through Reports folder on the report web portal, and then find my target report. So that was genre certificate target report. And I can click the little ... more options ellipsis button in the top right hand corner, and then choose to edit that report in Report Builder. I need to choose to open Microsoft Report Builder, and then it will open up a fresh copy of Report Builder with the design of the target report. And then I can simply double click on my 2 parameters, one at a time of course, and choose to make them hidden. They need to be hidden rather than internal. I mentioned this in the previous video. An internal parameter is one that is hidden but can't have values passed into it from outside the report it lives in. So that would be absolutely useless for this particular system. So let's set them to hidden, click OK. Do the same thing for the genre ID, set that one to hidden as well, and click OK. And then I can save that report. and then close down the report builder instance that's been opened up for me, and then get rid of that extra message that's popped up. Let's view our parent matrix again, and let's try to see the action films with a PG genre. If we click on that, we get exactly what we've asked for. We can go back to the parent report. Let's click on the overall average for action films. We get action films with any certificate assigned to them. Back to the parent report. We probably don't need to test every single possible option here. Let's go for the unknown certificate. And there's all the unknown certificates in any genre. And last but not least, let's click on that grand average cell to see all the films regardless of which genre and which certificate has been assigned. The final thing you might consider doing after having hidden the parameters of the target report, you might consider hiding the target report itself from the web portal. If I switch back to the drill through reports folder, it seems a little silly having that report there available for people to click on just to open up. I could make that invisible by clicking the ... button at the top right hand corner of the report and then choosing to manage it. There's an option on the Manage dialog box that allows me to hide the item. I can then click Apply. And if I then navigate back to the Drill Through Reports folder, you'll see that currently I'm displaying that because I've got my tiles set to display hidden items. But if I head back to my tiles menu and then choose to uncheck that option, you'll see that my target report has been hidden. So that might be a more sensible way to set up the web portal to avoid your end users seeing your target reports. To bring it back, of course, I could just make sure that I can see the hidden items again, and then go back to the same Manage option and uncheck the box, and then click Apply, and back to the Drill Through Reports folder. So there we go, that's how you create a drill through matrix so that you can see the details that underlie the aggregate values that the matrix displays. Hope you found that one useful. Thanks for watching. See you next time.